The Korean Zombie versus Dan Ige just took place in the main event of UFC Fight Night Vegas 29, Korean Zombie versus Ige, and the Korean Zombie got the job done by unanimous decision, basically picking apart Dan Ige for the better part of 5 rounds. I thought maybe there was an argument for Dan Ige to win the 5th, but the Korean Zombie always had the positional control on the ground. Even though he didn't do much with it, he had some close submission attempts. There was some moments where he actually looked like he had a rear naked choke in and settled, but decided against it in maybe the 3rd round, I believe it was. But the whole fight was basically determined by the fact that the Korean Zombie just had better grappling than Dan Ige in terms of IQ and awareness. I know Dan Ige was the black belt in jiu-jitsu, and the Korean Zombie had only just earned his black belt in jiu-jitsu despite way more experience than Dan Ige. But of course, black belts in MMA doesn't mean anything whatsoever. Dan Ige was just not in any way good at grappling whatsoever against the Korean Zombie, and the Korean Zombie kept being able to take his back. Dan Ige would shoot for a takedown, go for a submission attempt, and then just end up on the floor while the Korean Zombie scrambled round to take his back, and that's where most of the rounds would end, in all honesty. The Korean Zombie on the back of Dan Ige after a competitive stand-up fight, maybe the Korean Zombie outlanding Dan Ige on the feet. Ige would try and change things up a little bit and just end up on the ground every single time in the fight. But the Korean Zombie had a really good performance, man. For an older guy, still doing it after his performance against Brian Ortega, where I picked him to win. Of course, I picked Dan Ige to win this one, so obviously Korean Zombie shows up and looks really good. But when I picked him to win against Brian Ortega, he just stared at Ortega for 5 rounds. So, I think it's really good, man. The Korean Zombie in his last fight looked like he didn't want to fight whatsoever and looked maybe done with the sport, and now he's just reversed time and beat Dan Ige, and this is going to put him in a really good position inside the featherweight division. I think if Zabit Magomedsharipov does have successful surgery for whatever problem he has, I think the Korean Zombie versus Zabit Magomedsharipov is the new title elimination bout. Korean Zombie's going to be ranked number 4. If Yair Rodriguez eventually loses to Max Holloway or anyone else, if they find a replacement for him, the Korean Zombie's going to be ranked number 3 in the featherweight division. So this is a real big win for his old age to stick in there and get him right back in the mix in the featherweight division. Him versus Zabit would be a great fight next. But let's talk about the fight in general. I thought Dan Ige was going to go out there, land some good shots on the Korean Zombie and do pretty well. But man, I was really shocked by how thick as pig shit Dan Ige is. It was very strange, his performance, man. I thought he was going to go out there, work some shots, keep moving, go at the legs, go to the body, go to the head. And eventually he did start doing that in the 5th round. In fact, at one point in the 5th round, he had the Korean Zombie in a little bit of danger. Landed a lot of body shots, landed a lot of head shots. But then after that, he actually had the Korean Zombie a little bit hurt to the body and the head and a little bit phased a little bit by Dan Ige's power. Dan Ige decided to shoot a takedown and stick his head in the crotch of the Korean Zombie until losing the grappling situation, because of course he almost finished the Korean Zombie in the 5th and actually looked like he was starting to get a lot of momentum over the Korean Zombie. But of course, if you start doing that as an MMA fighter, you have to immediately stop yourself from winning and shoot a single leg that you know you're not going to get because you haven't got it the entire fight long. And the Korean Zombie just kept reversing the takedowns of Dan Ige or reversing the submission attempts of Dan Ige, ending up on top, and Ige had no answer on the ground for the Korean Zombie whatsoever, and Korean Zombie would just take his back. Round 2. Both guys doing good on the feet. Pretty good round. Korean Zombie slightly outlanding Dan Ige on the feet. Dan Ige goes for a Kimura with his back against the cage and just sits down on the canvas and rolls over until the Korean Zombie, of course, takes his back because he's rolling over and allowing someone to take his back. So the Korean Zombie did the right thing. He was kind of just flowing with the retardation of Dan Ige, really, more than anything. And that's something that's really impressive, man. Under the spotlight, under the bright lights, taking all of those shots, still being able to flow with the retardation of Dan Ige on the ground. Of course, Dan Ige at one point again pulled a guillotine as the Korean Zombie had a single leg on him, which meant that he obviously ended up on the ground because he's not going to get a guillotine whatsoever from that position, and that meant Korean Zombie ended up on top, landing some shots. Eventually Dan Ige would roll over, give up his back completely, the Korean Zombie would take it. It was just the same routine every single round. Korean Zombie slightly outland Dan Ige, throw yourself onto the canvas, Korean Zombie take the back, end the round. Basically what it was. At one point in the third, it actually looked like he had a really good rear naked choke in on Dan Ige. There were some good moments in the fight. There was a good knee in the 5th round of the Korean Zombie. He actually looked like he dropped Dan Ige in, I think, round 3 it was, or maybe round 4, round 2. The fight wasn't too crazy, so I can't really determine which round it was, but he actually caught Ige off balance with a good right hand at one point. But man, Dan Ige, just no combination punches until the 5th round. It's really unfortunate that that's what he decided to do that fight. He basically just sat there, tried to out-jab Korean Zombie, which is a very interesting game plan. And if that didn't work, he just winged haymakers, rushing forwards. I didn't expect that from Dan Ige, man. I really didn't. He had blatant gyno in the fight, so I'm kind of glad that he lost. But the Korean Zombie had a good jab. He had a good check hook. That's something that he was landing quite a bit. He was going for the uppercut, but he couldn't really find it. Dan Ige wasn't dipping his head as much. Dan Ige actually landed a couple of good shots, but I want to talk about this for a second. Was that a rigged fight for Dan Ige? Because I find it hard to give him a round, in all honesty, when you look back at that fight and you look back at the stats. I find it really hard to give him a round. And one thing that I noticed as this fight was going on was the amount of highlights that were just entirely, and purely and entirely, in favour of Dan Ige. The Korean Zombie would land a shot that looked like it dropped Dan Ige in one of the rounds, and they would show like a jab of Dan Ige landing in the slow motion highlights. It was a very strange situation. People were saying the commentary was biased as well. They looked like they had it set up for Ige to win. To give him 2 rounds is really strange, but then again, the same judge gave Marlon Vera 30-26 against Davy Grant. The judging today was a pure example of how rigged this sport is. I reckon they paid off one of the judges every single fight to just give it to the younger guy every single time. It was such a strange way of doing it, but that's what they had going on. Jung, though, great performance. Him versus the Korean Zombie would be great next. I assume he's going to continue his career. He looked amazing against Dan Ige. Sucks, though, man. Really does suck. When I don't pick the Korean Zombie, he just does really well and looks really good, and his opponent throws himself on the canvas with submission attempts that are definitely not going to work ever. But when I pick the Korean Zombie, he looks at Brian Ortega for 5 rounds and does nothing. So it's really difficult sport to predict sometimes, man, because you never know what versions of these fighters are going to show up. But the Korean Zombie, great win. I'm sure that was a big payday for him as well. Good stuff from the Korean Zombie, man. What else can you say? Legend of the sport, had some good jiu-jitsu. Oh, he earned his black belt at the end of the fight as well. But yeah, good stuff. Round 1 was the Korean Zombies, 14-10 on significant strikes. And he had him down and took the back because Dan Ige threw himself to the canvas at one point. Round 2, again, the Korean Zombie, 25-18. And he had him down and he took the back and he went for rear nakeds and had control time there as well and landed more total strikes. No rounds for Ige so far. Round 3 was 5-5 on strikes, but the Korean Zombie had some really close submission attempts, rear naked chokes in, control time again. Dan Ige, I think this time, what did he throw himself on the canvas with this time? Oh, a guillotine. That's what it was. The Korean Zombie had a good single leg, and Dan Ige just ripped a guillotine, ended up on bottom because that's a smart thing to do. And the Korean Zombie ended up on top, took the back, went for rear nakeds. Good stuff from the Korean Zombie. 3-0 Korean Zombie pretty clearly, I thought, by the end of the 3rd round. Even though it might have looked close at the start, I reckon the Korean Zombie definitely won those 3 rounds. Round 4, again, 31-22, the Korean Zombie. Won that round, took down Dan Ige, ended up on top, took the back, controlled the back position, just won it by doing that, basically, in the 4th round. I know Ige started to get a little bit busy off of his back, but again, total strikes in favour of Korean Zombie, significant strikes in favour of Korean Zombie. The only round I can see giving to Dan Ige is round 5, but even then, he ended up throwing himself on the canvas again, shooting a bad takedown, and just making sure that he had no chance of winning, basically. It's so weird to me, man. You're down 4 rounds, you know you need a finish, you rock the Korean Zombie and hurt him to the body, and then decide to shoot a takedown on him against a cage, where he has his legs sprawled, and he's obviously going to defend it. Very surprising fight IQ from Dan Ige there. Really shockingly shit. But that's okay, because I'm only picking him to win a fight, so it's not like it means anything or anything like that. But good performance by the Korean Zombie, man. Definitely want to see him versus Zabit next. If Zabit is not coming back, I reckon they could do the Korean Zombie versus Edson Barboza. I'd love to watch that fight. I think that'd be a great name value fight in the main event of a fight night again. I'll just check the rankings right now of the featherweight division. We've also got Arnold Allen, Josh Emmett. I think Allen and Emmett are going to take on each other. I think that's the fight to make. Then the winner of that one can maybe get the loser of Volkanovski Ortega or something like that. But I feel like that's a great scrap to make. Edson Barboza, number 9, versus the Korean Zombie. I imagine Dan Ige is going to slip below Barboza, so maybe Barboza will become number 8 in the division. Korean Zombie should stay at number 4, but if Yair loses to Holloway, I can see Korean Zombie getting number 3, and Ortega's obviously going to stay above the Korean Zombie as well. Good stuff. Korean Zombie won. Ige just fucking kept giving up his back and kept jumping for submissions that just weren't in at all, non-stop, because otherwise he might have had a chance at winning. So good stuff from the Dan Ige. No, not good stuff from him. You know what? Fuck Dan Ige. Dude has blatant gyno and he still fucking lost. Let's just say it how it is. Blatant fucking gyno on his chest. One side, hasn't been there before. In his last fight, he laid out someone out cold with a walk-off KO, one punch, who'd never been finished by strikes before in their entire career, and had never been wobbled by strikes before in their entire career. Dan Ige lays him out in record time nearly for his own career. First KO of Dan Ige's career in the UFC. And he has gyno at the same time. I thought he'd carry that power, but thank God the Korean Zombie beat him, because I tell you this, man. Grant had a bit of gyno. Dan Ige had a bit of gyno. I think, and also, who else had it? Wellington Turman had gyno. I think they're starting to figure out a way around the drug test. Don't know about you guys, but I'm starting to feel like they're figuring out a way past this drug test, because I've never seen gyno before in my life in the UFC. And all of a sudden, there's a lot of fighters with it. So I think there's something going on there that USADA needs to check into. But a great performance. If I'm Dan Ige and I'm looking to bounce back, I'm going to go for maybe the loser of Josh Emmett, Arnold Allen. Either way, Dan Ige is going to need to take some time off. I don't see him taking on Sadiq Youssef. Maybe if Shane Burgos comes back at the end of the year, November, December, we can do Shane Burgos versus Dan Ige. It was supposed to be made before. The fight was booked before. It got cancelled and it got replaced, and people jumped in and people jumped out. So let's make Dan Ige versus Shane Burgos again. Not number 2. Again, because it never happened the first time. So let's do that one. And then the Korean Zombie versus Zabit Magomedsharipov or Edson Barboza. Either one is fine with me. Like and subscribe. Thank you for watching. Click that button up there. Toodle pip. Dan Ige is shittily bad fight IQ. I hate it. Goodbye.